And what is the one thing you will not find? That is right wood. Also, while the Germans overestimated water supply needs, they underestimated the importance of fresh supplies. Combined with the sometimes burning heat and the poor makeup of rations for the desert climate, this leads to many more soldiers getting sick than in other theaters. Finally, there is also the problem of the infantry equipment. The pith helmets, shorts, and knee-length stockings they were given caused much laughter. "We look like a lot of bloody Tyroleans," said one German soldier. The pith helmets were soon thrown aside and replaced by a loose-peaked cap, the Einheitsfeldmütze, which would become a symbol of the Deutsche Afrika Korps. So without making it sound nicer than it was, the Germans were badly unprepared for desert warfare. Yet by now, there was at least some small bright side. They had started dealing with some of these problems and had shown themselves to be pretty good at adjusting to hostile and unfamiliar conditions. The supply routes had been improved as much as possible, using tiny coastal ports and small naval vessels to ease the load. Perhaps even more importantly, while the land might be hostile to physical things, it was also almost perfect for German armored warfare tactics. As an early Wehrmacht report from Libya explains, the principles laid down for tank warfare have been entirely justified and should be applied unchanged. The desert is an ideal tank country with unlimited space for maneuver. Rommel knows all of these problems, of course, and it just so happens that on the 15th, there is a chance to sharpen German desert warfare skills. We have talked a lot about the German, Italian, and Commonwealth forces active in Libya, yet there is another active force hundreds of kilometers inland, the French. As the situation changed across the north of the continent over the last few weeks, another fight has been going on between the Italians and the Free French forces. On March 1st, a group of French soldiers under Colonel Philippe Leclerc successfully attacked and captured the Italian fort at the oasis of Kufra, located about 500 kilometers south of Benghazi. For the French, this success is hugely important. Leclerc and his men used the moment to swear an oath that will become known as the Oath of Kufra, promising never to stop fighting until the French flag once again proudly flies over the cathedral at Strasbourg. Here I could talk for hours about why, how, and when the Free French forces came into the picture, but that is not the focus of this series. Right now, what you need to know is this. Chad, a French colony bordering Libya to the south, joined Free France, not Vichy France, under its governor, Félix Éboué. And from there, the French have increased the pressure, nothing to match Operation Compass and, the Commonwealth attacks, but enough to be a constant headache for Italian command. A headache that soon also troubles Rommel, but one in which he sees a chance to kill two birds with one stone. The Italian High Command asked us to carry out this operation because General de Gaulle's troops in southern Libya were beginning to become a nuisance. As far as we were concerned, however, the main purpose of the move was to gain experience of long marches, and in particular, to test the suitability of our equipment for African conditions. So on March 15th, an Italo-German group made up of a reinforced machine gun battalion and an Italian battalion, both under the command of Oberst Montemurro, is sent toward the town of Murzuk and its fort, located in the province of the same name. In the far south of Libya, bordering Chad and directly in the path of any further French advance. Operation Sonnenblume, as it is called, will take some time to reach its destination. With a 725-kilometer trek into the desert ahead of them, Rommel is sure that valuable lessons will be learned. But the Germans are not the only ones learning valuable lessons. One could even say that the British learn ultra-valuable lessons this week. Ultra is one of the greatest assets the British now have, though it still has some early problems. So, first, what is Ultra, and why is it so important? Ultra is the code name given to the decoding of German radio traffic encrypted by the infamous Enigma machine, an electromechanical music device. By this point in the war, the British have already had major success with this. Early last year, the code breakers at Bletchley Park, members of GC&CS, the Government Code and Cipher School, cracked the Luftwaffe Enigma code under the cipher called the Red Key, and for months Luftwaffe radio traffic could be decoded every day. Then the Germans did something to interrupt British decryption. They changed the cipher from red to a new light, snorts blue. That does not stop the codebreakers for very long, though. On February 28, 1941, GC&CS managed to break light blue as well and can continue listening in to Luftwaffe traffic, including that of the 10th Fliegerkorps based in Sicily and North Africa. I should note here that while Luftwaffe codes have been broken, German Army codes remain unbroken, at least for the moment. Still, until this week, on March 13th, there was no direct line of communication to send this important information to Wavell, the theater commander. On the 14th, Wavell receives CXMO-1, the first ultra message sent directly to Cairo, a feat that was not easy since the wireless channels to the Middle East were already badly overloaded. This raises a couple of interesting questions. We have discussed how, over the last few weeks, some of the decisions and guesses made by the British High Command seem to lack enough information. But wait, if the British cracked Enigma again on February 28th, how is that possible? Even though the information was not sent straight to Wavell, as it is from now on, it was still passed along, right? Well, for one thing, the people receiving this information do not know where it comes from, meaning they cannot correctly judge how important it is. Instead, they receive summarized reports. This is done on purpose to avoid leaks, which would tell the Germans that the British have cracked their code. But that is not all. Sometimes the British are forced simply not to act on ultra-intelligence. Let us say that by decoding a Luftwaffe Enigma message, the British know where a German ship is off the coast of North Africa. If that ship is then quickly attacked, and this happens several times, the Germans might realize that Enigma is not as impossible to crack as they think. So the strictest orders were given that a sighting by an aircraft on what looked like a routine patrol over the area must always come before an air or surface strike, for the sinking of even the largest convoy could not make up for the loss of the source that would probably follow an alarm and a careful change of cipher. Then there are also the early problems I mentioned. Music, writing, and combining these intelligence reports is an art by itself, one that takes time and practice to do well. Time the British simply have not had. Besides that, command treats the report as just one of many information channels and does not give it the proper weight. As the historian Hinsley explains, either from wishful thinking or from unfamiliarity with the material, operational authorities in Cairo underrated the value of the Enigma evidence. Overall, together with other British weaknesses in North Africa, the strained supply lines, the understrength troops on the ground, and the poor equipment, this greatly limits the impact of Ultra. No matter how accurate it may be, information about the enemy can never by itself be enough to win battles. It must first be properly understood and used, and then the force needed to take advantage of it must be ready at hand. Finally, there is also bad luck. The Ultra message sent to Wavell on the 13th reveals music that Rommel will head to Berlin on the 19th, but the messages contain no other information. So while the British are left guessing what exactly the meeting in Berlin is about, at least the commander's departure from the theater means that any advances in the following days are very unlikely. Music right? Snorts. We shall see about that. For now, let us turn to another steady companion in this coverage, the island of Malta. On March 18th, Hitler himself is once again faced with the problem of Malta. During an oral situation report, Grand Admiral Erich Raeder tells the Führer that capturing Malta should be seen as necessary, but Hitler does not listen. Yes, taking the island would be great for German shipping in the Mediterranean, especially since German troops and supplies are now steadily on the way to Africa. But there are problems. The only practical choice would be to drop German troops onto the island by parachute. However, nearly all German paratroopers are currently busy with their coming attack on the island of Crete. Malta itself is strongly fortified too, and Luftwaffe officials have told Hitler about the many problems this could cause. For now then, Malta is safe, at least from German paratroops. The island keeps getting hammered by the Luftwaffe and the Italian Air Force day after day. The 10th. Fliegerkorps does get reinforcements this week in the form of a courier squadron of Jagdgeschwader 27. Think Fieseler Storch or Bf-108 Typhoon. War is a deadly thing, as we all know. War in the desert, though, is especially deadly. You are not fighting only the enemy. There is a third force, fighting both you and the enemy at the same time. And in this case, the old saying, the enemy. Of my enemy is my friend, does not apply to the desert. Anyone and everyone, no matter the uniform, is an enemy to be beaten down and overcome. This week we will take a closer look at just how harsh this enemy, the North African desert, can be. I'm Indy Nadell, and welcome back to this World War II North Africa miniseries. I thought it would be a good idea to give you a quick recap of what has happened so far. In the first 5 episodes, we saw how Operation Compass shattered the Italian 10th Army and badly damaged Rome's position in Libya. Lifted by victory, yet stretched by other duties, the British sent troops to Greece under Operation Luster, leaving only a thin screen in Cyrenaica because a new Axis attack was still months away, right? Operation Sonnenblume lands Erwin Rommel in Africa, and he forms the Africa Corps and drives from Tripoli toward El Agheila. Axis convoys from Naples increase his forces, while British Malta, a nuisance to both Hitler and Mussolini, is hit again and again by the Luftwaffe. As we pick things up this week, on March 12th, the German forward units sit about 20 to 30 kilometers from the British at El Agheila. For Rommel, March 12th begins with a pleasant surprise, a parade. He has just returned from the front and watches. A show put on by parts of the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 5th Panzer Regiment, as well as 1 battalion of the Italian Arietta Tank Division. Right after the parade ends, the units from the 5th Panzers are sent forward toward the German front position. So Rommel will soon have German armor at his disposal right at the front lines. However, it will take time before the German tanks can get there all the way from Tripoli. The next day, Rommel decides to move the headquarters of the whole Africa Corps closer to the front lines too. Preparations begin at once, and everything is to be moved to Sirte, still some distance from the 5th Light Division headquarters at Arco dei Fileni, but hundreds of kilometers closer to the British positions. Also on the 13th, the troops sent by Rommel toward the oasis of Marata at the end of last week arrive at their destination. They find the oasis abandoned. Well, that is not fully true, because on that same day, a patrol from the King's Dragoon Guards reports to Archibald Wavell, the British theater commander, that the oasis is abandoned, although they also report tracks in the sand not far from it. By chance, these two enemy units seem to have just missed each other, and only just. By taking the oasis, Rommel secures another well and airstrip for the Axis, while also making sure that no British flanking move can catch the Germans by surprise. As Rommel himself explains, it appears to me to be essential A, to occupy the coastal strip west of El Agheila at the most favorable point and to defend it firmly using mines and mobile forces. B, to occupy the area south of the Salt Lakes where the oasis is in order to interfere with enemy ground reconnaissance and, in close cooperation with the Air Force, to stop the advance of larger enemy forces. It is not only that, though. With Axis troops now at the oasis, if the British wanted to push through there, they would need tanks. And if the British choose to send armored forces into the rough ground south of the Salt Lakes, a force the size of the 5th Light Division, with strong air support, could stop them in their tracks. Or so Rommel believes. But back to moving the Africa Corps headquarters to Sirte. To watch things himself, Rommel takes off at 2 p.m. on the 13th from Mellahah, an Italian airstrip just outside Tripoli. He is flying in an Italian Caproni Car 309, a twin-engined reconnaissance and ground attack aircraft often called the Ghibli. The trip does not go so smoothly. The pilot of the Ghibli spots another Ghibli and not another plane, which quickly makes him turn around at once. A Ghibli is the Italian word for what you might call a sirocco, the desert windstorm. But what rises before Rommel is a force of nature, something the locals know to avoid at all costs. A sandstorm, a giant rolling wall that blocks out the horizon, driven through the air at breakneck speed by the hot and dry southern winds of the Sahara. In his lack of experience with such storms, Rommel is not happy with the pilot's choice. Music. The pilot, ignoring my angry words and my attempts to make him fly on, turned back, forcing me to continue the journey by car from the airfield at Misrata. Rommel continues his trip along the Via Balbia, the road that runs along the North African coast, linking Tripoli to Benghazi. It is there that he understands the pilot has just saved his life. Now we realized how little idea we had of the terrible force of such a storm. Huge clouds of reddish dust blocked all visibility and forced the car's speed down to a crawl. Often the wind was so strong it was impossible to drive along the road. Sand streamed down the windscreen like water. We painfully gasped for breath through handkerchiefs held over our faces, and sweat poured off our bodies in the unbearable heat. So, this was the Ghibli. Silently, I sent my apologies to the pilot, but the Ghibli and the damage it brings are far from the only obstacles the desert puts in front of the Germans. It has now been a couple of weeks since operations on the ground began, and the problems keep growing. The British believe that the German troops now in Africa, or heading there, have received special training for these conditions. The truth could not be more different. There were some unsuccessful experiments meant to improve how vehicles moved through sand. But the only problem that seems to have received much study was the loading, unloading, and transportation of armored fighting vehicles. The result of these unsuccessful experiments is that the trucks, in order to float across the sand, are fitted with double-tired back wheels. The trouble is, stones and other debris like to get stuck between such tires, causing constant and difficult maintenance work, and the trucks are far from the only equipment with major problems. Take the German tanks. Their oil filters and engine seals are not made with the desert in mind. Since sand has a habit of forcing its way into, well, everywhere, every nook and cranny, this is bad news. Doubly bad, since the standard air filters are not good enough for the job either. Also, the great majority of German vehicles are fitted with gasoline engines, even though diesel would have been much more reliable and far better suited to tropical and desert conditions. But even that is not all. Add to that the long distance. The tanks must travel from Tripoli to the front lines and the generally strained supply lines, and this means their engine life is cut by about half. Under these conditions, a tank could cover only 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers without an overhaul. The approach march from Tripoli had therefore already used up most of their working range, and the soldiers themselves are doing no better. Take the standard wood-burning stove used by the Wehrmacht. Now picture yourself in the endless, sandy plains of North Africa. Look right, look left, look far and wide. While no Bf-109s are in Africa just yet, this is a clear sign that they will arrive soon, and that means that the days of the RAF or RAF having the best fighters over North Africa may soon be over. Their Hurricanes will then have to compete, with a plane able to win a one-on-one fight. More German troops also keep arriving at the port of Tripoli. Here, things go on as usual. However, Rommel is also told that the 15th Panzer Division, the 2nd Division meant to become part of his Africa Corps, will be delayed. For now, there is nothing he can do about that. But the desert itself has joined the battle. Just this week, a Ghibli sandstorm grounded Rommel's flight, vehicles choked on sand, engines overheated, and men weakened from lack of water and wood. Rommel has pushed his headquarters toward Sirte, secured Marata to protect the flank, and sent Group Montemuro deep toward Murzuk to learn long-range desert war. Ultra began flowing directly to Wavell, useful, but late and not fully appreciated, while Malta remained an anvil under the non-stop blows of the hammer of the Luftwaffe. As he leaves for Berlin on the 18th, Rommel sends a report ahead to OKW, Wehrmacht High Command, titled Appraisal of the Possibilities for an Attack Operation in North Africa. In it, There are some juicy details like, the attack toward the east must therefore be made soon, at the latest before the great summer heat comes. Therefore, for the carrying out of all the operations, only the month of May remains available, and it is therefore necessary that every preparation is finished by the end of April. But will Rommel really wait until May to attack? If so, it is strange that just before stepping onto the plane to Berlin, he tells General Streich, commander of the 5th Light Division, to prepare for an assault on the British frontmost positions, the ford of Eligala, next week on March 24th. Very strange indeed. To find out whether, and if so, how exactly, Rommel's push will happen, and how the British will manage if they do not get an early warning from Ultra, tune in next week. It is only together with the Time Ghost Army that we can build any meaningful defense against revisionism and subjective versions of history. To join the cause, join the Army. Head over to timeghost.tv or patreon.com. These are the newest commissioned officers in the Army, and the World War II Army Member of the Week is Patrick Botts. Do not forget to subscribe. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.